Hold those guys up.
Yeah, right in front of the mic.
Could I have your attention, please? While you continue with dessert and coffee, I'd like to make a few remarks and a few introductions. First of all, for those who don't know me, I'm Alex Bell, the current chairman of the division. Who are you? And I'd like to begin by introducing the members of the executive committee, certainly those who are here. Our chairman-elect is Rajagopalan, who is sitting over here in front of me. Hold the applause till the end. We'll go a little faster this way. Vice chairman is Mike White, who is not with us today. The secretary is Mohammed Labib, also, at this table. Treasurer is not with us today, that's Charlie Campbell. Dave Osborne, on my left, is our meeting secretary. Noel Turner is the membership secretary and unfortunately also can't be with us today. But we do have our three counselors, Avram Madalia, in the back, Tom Fort, and Ed Kugler, all at the same table. Boy, how'd you guys get together like that? Counseling, huh? We also have several members of the executive committee, members at large, and only I see one of the three is here, Jay Mann, also at the front table there. And the other two members are Barbara Kinzig and John Gland. I should mention that Jay wears two hats. He's also the chairman of our program committee. This is a relatively new committee, about 2 years standing now, which is trying to organize our program on a 3 to 5 year basis so that we can see into the future as well as we can. I'd like to now make a few presentations to certain people who have contributed their efforts to the division and have helped to make it a success, and also in other ways for the ACS. And I'll start in alphabetical order with Art Adamson, who's on my right. And I'd like to present to him a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the division for his efforts in founding Langmuir and leading it through its early years. Thank you.
We welcome papers. Send us a manuscript.
And buy subscriptions. Another person we'd like to recognize is Ed Kugler, who was the secretary of the division from 1982 to 86. He did a super job and led us to the point where we were evaluated as one of the best divisions in our size range. I guess this was 2 years ago. Yeah. And we have a certificate for you. It's also a tradition at these meetings to recognize the immediately past chairman, and in this case it would be Bob Rowell, who was chairman in 1986. And Bob, if you'd come forward, we have several things for you.
Also the tab for the matcha.
That's right. A certificate commemorating the occasion, a pin that you can wear, and a copy of the first colloid symposium. Congratulations.
The same speech that I
Send papers.
We're looking for a few good papers.
Now this is an unusual year in the sense that 3 members of the division have been recognized by the ACS for their contributions to science. Keith Hall, who is with us this afternoon, just received the Petroleum Division Award. Wolfgang Sackler, who is not with us this afternoon, received the not the Kendall, the Murphy Award for the INEC division. And the Kendall Award, he is sitting on my right over here. We're already giving it away, John.
Some mistake.
Now, since the Kendall Award is the one award from the division, I think it's appropriate that we hear from a few of John's friends who are going to warm his heart and perhaps go to other portions of his anatomy. For that, I'll turn it over to our MC, Galen Fisher.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's certainly appropriate for so many friends of John to be here, I think, in honoring him for the Kendall Award, which he so justly deserves. We heard a few serious remarks over the past 2 days about John. And my colleagues here, Ted Meady and Wayne Goodman, are really going to be responsible for what happens here, but I will say a few things first in the way of introduction. I think we all agree that it's really not possible to roast John in any true sense of the word. He's such a dedicated worker and comes up with so much insight, is always involved in his work, and such a straight arrow in other parts of his life. It's really almost impossible to find any dirt at all that one could use in any meaningful way as a roast. So maybe it's better to put this in the context of just indicating how human John can be, and that he really has some of these characteristics that we all share. Let me just say that just because of his interaction with so many people over the years, that it was very easy in terms of organizing a symposium. I knew that everyone I would call up was going to say, yes, I'd love to be there and love to give a talk, and that was certainly the case. And so the people who have been speaking, the other 11 speakers, all came here just gladly. Especially Ted and Wayne, because they were looking forward to this luncheon, I think. So let me just say a little bit about John's checkered past as a way of introduction. John grew up in Hagerstown, Maryland, and grew up there, and as I mentioned yesterday, showed his talents in science very early. I say his first passion is probably research. He had this basement laboratory at the age of 9 in his home where he would mix up chemicals, and I think by the time he got into high school, he probably knew more than all the chemistry teachers that there, and in fact went to Juniata with the expressed intent of doing chemistry. I think he knew very quickly that he didn't really respond well to organic chemistry, but physical chemistry he knew was... Well, in fact, one of the teachers he had there at Juniata was a friend of Paul Emmett's, and Paul Emmett used to come up and visit, so I actually got to know Professor Emmett there, and that may have interested him somewhat in catalysis at an early age. Juniata, I think, played an important part in John's life. Of course, he met his wife there. He was a teaching assistant his junior year, and she started as a freshman, and that's where I met Karen. Also, when he was taking a course, he met Dave Hercules, was his teaching assistant. Dave had to go to another important function today, or I'm sure he would be here. So when I wanted to find out things about John, I of course went to Dave Hercules. Anyway, and I think one of the first things that we can learn about John, another part of his life happened at Juniata. I think we have to now take ourselves back to 1953 here and think of the time then. This was a more conservative period than maybe existed since, and so on. In Juniata, being in the middle of the state of Pennsylvania, certainly not one of the more unconservative places in the country. But the high point of sort of being carousing or whatever there, I think at that time and that place was probably considered to be a panty raid. And in fact, these apparently did happen at Juniata College on occasion. And it was just one warm, sultry evening early in the spring. one year. And there were a number of girls in a third floor of a dormitory who had found a group of boys down below that they were essentially egging on to come and challenge in a challenging point of view. Now, of course, I wouldn't know anything about how those things happen, but I mean, the apparently
Being from another era.
I have only passing experience when the power failure. No one had anything else to do. But anyway, I don't know if there was a good excuse for that at Juniata, but anyway, John was a member of this group down on the ground of young men and this young women up on the third floor. Now, of course, the doors were all locked to the dormitories. There's no way to get in. However, because of safety reasons, there is a fire tower beside the building with stairways up the outside of the building. Now, John knows the story. I don't have to tell it, I guess. Anyway. But unbeknownst to the fellows below, the Dean of Women had stationed herself at this doorway, the only way into the dormitory, which she, of course, full well knew. But no one else below knew that she was there. So finally, tensions built and everyone charged up the stairs, and of course, leading the way is our friend here. And I can just only convey her first remark is, "Not you, John."
I was actually her chauffeur. It was a very difficult time.
So, anyway, I don't know what transpired after that. After Juniata, John went to MIT, where in fact he roomed with Dave Hercules there and a guy named Gil Van Norman. And another passion of John's life, I think, comes forward there, and I think that we could say eating, maybe. Food, something other word. I mean, I think we would all agree that certainly plays a role in John's life. And Dave hadn't really experienced this in close up before, but they discovered quickly that there was a problem here because John loved to come home after classes and eat something, and they would keep this little reservoir of gourmet cheese and they found that very quickly this was gone, and they never got to eat any of this. But they found John being a little more omnivorous than them, that it was sufficient for them to get 2-pound boxes of Velveeta and put them in the front of the refrigerator. Put their camembert in the back. By the time John had gotten through the Velveeta, they would have eaten, gotten through most of the, 2 of them would have finished. So, anyway.
I never knew that. Only your friends will tell you. I never knew that.
Anyway, at MIT, of course, he did some very nice infrared spectroscopy, which he still does as well as anyone in the world, and CO on metal films with Garland. After his PhD, he went to Antioch College and taught there. That's as a work-study program, as I think I also alluded to yesterday. I don't know if I have my facts exactly right, but it certainly found that he enjoyed, I think, the research. He was missing the research from MIT, and found teaching there to be a situation where he just couldn't do enough of the research he liked. He'd hoped to mix them, maybe. So off to MBS when an opportunity arose there to go there. And 1963, after teaching 3 years at Antioch, he came to MBS. And at MBS, worked with Milt Shear, I believe, and that was about the same time that Ted Mady arrived, working with Ralph Klein. And it took them about a year to meet each other, and then the rest is history when they became Yadian mates. Let me just mention, I know that Ted will do the MBS very well, and I certainly can't. I've only was there for 3 years when I overlapped with them both, but let me just allude to one story that conveys the other passion of John's life, which is his research. When he went to England in 1970-71, working with Dave King at Norwich, he got there in the fall, I guess, and the equipment got going, and finally I could never really understand tea time. I don't think this idea of taking data until tea time or something just didn't fit. But the biggest problem was he got his equipment all baked out and everything else, and along came Christmas vacation, and Norwich normally closes down Christmas. So he actually had to go and get a faculty vote to keep his lab open over Christmas so that he could do some work. And I think that's just typical of the zeal to which John brings to his research. I think I'll stop at this point. If I think of anything else, I'll be sure and pass it on. But and I will now let Ted proceed with his comments. Thank you.
Well, when Galen called me a few weeks ago to suggest that there would be a roast of John Yates, I thought that this is really going to be a tough time. I mean, if you want to roast somebody, you have to find some weaknesses, someplace where they've really fouled up. And I think it's safe to say I've known John for many years now, and I don't see any of those weaknesses. I mean, he's a very clean living guy. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink to excess, he doesn't chase women, he doesn't carouse. But despite all that, he's really a fun guy. So if we really can't roast him, maybe we can grill him a little bit, just singe a few hairs. But I think the way we have to approach this is to look at some of his strengths. And I guess I would call it maybe excesses of virtue rather than anything like weaknesses. And one of John's strengths, I think, is his persistence, his willingness and his insistence on digging into a problem until he really understands it completely. Now, one of John's research activities has involved the spectroscopy of molecules on surfaces. As a matter of fact, he started with his PhD work back in the late 50s with Garland looking at CO on nickel, isotopic mixing studies, and looking at vibrational spectroscopy. And he did a grand job. He had about $200 worth of apparatus and some isotopically labeled gases and a borrowed infrared spectrometer, and did a fine job. He continued his interest in vibrational spectroscopy after he came to NBS with this same trip to England that Galen referred to. That's where he developed with Dave King the infrared reflection absorption spectroscopy method. Well, maybe by this time a couple $1,000s worth of apparatus and an old reconstituted Grubb Parsons spectrometer, as I recall. Well, now, of course, you all heard yesterday the beautiful work that he's doing now involving the infrared spectroscopy and isotopic mixing of CO and nickel. And I think this really demonstrates John's persistence through the years. Of course, this new apparatus he's got cost at least $500,000, and it's got all the bells and whistles that one can imagine for surface science. Now, as a surface scientist, John, I don't think any of us would fault you for digging into this CO on nickel problem, but we're a little bit worried about the extrapolation. But the next generation of apparatus is going to take the entire DOE budget. Another area where I think John has a particular strength is his imagination, his ability to see things that other people don't see. And one example of this also comes from this England era. During the time that John was in England, we were working on a review article together, mailing bits of it back and forth to try to put it all together. And at that time, there was a mail strike that developed in England. As I recall, they were on strike for a couple of months. And so the only way that things could be mailed back and forth would be via the Armed Forces postal system. John had discovered that he could drive to an Air Force base, I guess about 30 miles from Norwich. And we communicated that way. So finally, I believe the sequence was that I sent to him the final draft of the manuscript, typewritten with the glossy prints, 40 of them. He corrected them and then sent them back, but they never arrived. We communicated by telephone, realized that the things must be lost in the mail. It was rather upsetting because it was the final draft, ready to be submitted to the journal. So John put a tracer on it, and the Armed Forces postal system ended up sending both of us postcards inquiring about this lost item. And one of the questions was the value, and so I thought, well, golly, the typewritten manuscript, we've got Xerox copies, the glossy prints we could reproduce, we had the negatives, $200. So John got the same postcard, as I recall, and he reasoned a little bit differently. I mean, this is a creative work, how can you put a value on it? And so after thinking about it, he realized that it took 6 man-months of work to go into this effort. That's labor and overhead, $20,000. So I think the postal inspector, when he saw that, must have thought these fellows are crazy. We never got the $20,000. We never got the manuscript back either. John, wasn't it right after that that you put the addition on the house, though? The last of John's positive abilities is his ability to sleep soundly. And some of the sounds he makes when he's sleeping are rather legendary and rather remarkable. It's sort of a cross between a chainsaw with a faulty engine and some sort of a foghorn. Well, one time there were a group of us from NBS that were traveling together up to Bell Laboratories, John and Wayne and Cedric Powell and myself. And in order to keep the per diem rates down, we had to pair off. And Wayne and I were in one room, and John and Cedric were in the other. So about 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a sound that sounded like somebody was trying to cut the legs off the bed or something. And I thought, my golly, Wayne snores as loudly as John does. This is unbelievable. And I was just about to decide to get up and shake Wayne and try to get him to stop when I saw Wayne get up and go to the bathroom. And the snoring continued. It was John coming through the walls. So let me just conclude by saying that, John, it's been a real treat knowing you and working with you all the years at NBS. I think that all of us who've worked closely with you realize that you've had a really very positive impact on our lives, and you certainly did on mine. I appreciate the years we spent together, and good luck and continued success. Thanks.
Well, when the mysterious organizers of this event started discussing the possibility of talking, roasting John, talking about anecdotes, I said, well, that shouldn't be too difficult. And I know a few John Yates stories, and I think many of them amusing, even some I could tell. But the resolution of the request got a little more specific. They wanted me to recount one event, which I think turns out to be, I think, very fortunate now that John is winning the Kendall Award at this point in time, because it turns out this thing happened about 10 years ago, and really it's only begun to be humorous to me over the last couple of years now. I talked to some professional therapists about this sort of thing. They seem to think that normally when this sort of traumatic thing happens to a person, it normally takes on the order of a decade or so to recover. So I may be on schedule, but let me begin the story. It starts back, I think about 1977. I just come to the Bureau and just finished up the first piece of absorption work on formaldehyde, as I recall, submitted it to the ACS, and it was accepted, and John and I were preparing to go to New Orleans to the meeting. My first ACS meeting, and really my first real big talk. And of course I had all my viewgrams ready and my talk all compartmentalized in my mind. So we showed up in New Orleans, and at that time we were on a rather conservative budget, not at the Bureau, not like this lavish spending machine it is now, isn't it? And we doubled up. Now we didn't double up in the Marriott or the Hilton. In fact, we didn't go to what you might call the second-tier hotels. I mean, we were generously maybe the third-tier hotels. And these are the sort of hotels that are not household names. I mean, I don't recall exactly.
Starlight Inn.
I don't remember the name, but I think the Dixie Inn comes to mind. I do remember they had difficulties checking in people that had luggage. They kind of found it curious that we were going to spend the entire night. Well, John and I, we assured them that we not only would spend the night, but in fact, we planned to spend the entire week. And after that, I think we checked in and we proceeded downtown, had a nice lunch at dinner rather downtown with Bob Rye, as I recall. And I thought, yeah, this is great, I'm going to really cash in on my science here now, have a good time. So we went back then to the hotel, and I think we had a discussion about ACS meeting, that sort of thing. And then the plot thickens. We retired for the evening. And I did. I went to sleep, and I think I slept for some period of time, I don't know what, and then I was rather abruptly awakened. I think it's a sort of abruptness that one kind of associates with a grizzly bear running into a pup tent at Yosemite or something. But it turns out I wasn't being physically assaulted, but I was verbally being assaulted. There was some kind of sound being emanating from the dark corner of John's the room over there. And I thought at first maybe this gentleman had taken some mechanical device to bed with him and he was manipulating a thing. But then I looked over there, there was no serious gyrations that would have associated with this sort of sound. And so then it occurred to me, in a flashback to my youth, I'd seen this National Geographic program that made an impression on me. It was something about Canadian mooses, or what, these large antlered Canadian things that they had discussed their mating habits. And during the kind of a terminal active period in the bull moose's time of year, he makes these sort of unbiological sounds. And that was the thing I was hearing coming from the room. Well, it was no big deal. I was young. I could spend the night without sleep. It was no problem. My talk wasn't until Thursday. It was all ready. And I made some observations. I mean, for example, one I remember was there was this neon sign, probably the Dixie Inn, outside my window that I realized had a periodicity to it. But it suddenly changed in the course of the night, and it began in phase with a swinging chandelier, which was in phase with John Snow. Well, anyway, still no big deal. I really didn't have to sleep. But then suddenly, about dawn, I realized that John had snored my talk out of my head. I forgot my talk. I rushed over to check my viewgraph to see if indeed it had faded. And so then I spent the next part of the day reconstructing my talk. And I remember, but I was obviously concerned about the next evening. I went out to the local drugstore, bought me some, this is absolutely true, I brought some earplugs. John, you don't know this. I can absolutely assure you that earplugs firmly placed in the ear with your hands firmly clasped over them absolutely will not attenuate that particular. So I began to kind of develop a kind of a strange love twitch in my eye. Getting somewhat abusive potentially. This went the next evening, no sleep. And we went into the Wednesday. Well, this was the eve of the big talk, when I knew something had to give. I had to get some relief. I had to sleep the next day. I had reconstructed my talk after having it being snored out of me again. And then the next day, I remember a stroke of luck happened. Mike White roared into town. He didn't have a reservation. And he asked me, would he mind if he would share the room with me? Well, normally I'm not that particularly sadistic, but I gleefully accepted the invitation because misery definitely loves company. And I thought maybe having him in there would somehow dampen, psychologically, even having more protoplasm in the room would kind of dampen out this unusual noise. Well, it turned out it didn't. That evening was John, you were at your best, and I was at my worst. And I remember during the early morning hours, after having stayed awake all the time and essentially given up and certainly had forgotten all my talk again, I sat up in my bed rather frustrated, and I looked over in the dimness of the night, and I'd forgotten all about Mike, but there I saw a man, a gentleman, looking back at me, wearing the same expression that I was wearing, looking back at him, and we didn't say a word, we just... So somehow, the strange luck twist and all this, I did give my talk, and most certainly with some wings. So I can tell you this, John, look, we all know you do great science. I think you know that. You live life very well. I think you know that. You may not know how you sleep. I can tell you, you do that very, very well.
Well, you may wonder how Karen Yates has learned to live with this, and she claims that there's absolutely no problem, that John doesn't really snore that loud anyway. So I think you found the perfect wife. She did tell me the one time in Yellowstone National Park, which you were there in 1981, I guess, when you were sleeping, and you were both sound asleep, I guess, and all of a sudden there's this huge racket just banging on the walls or the ceilings or the floors. You didn't know where it was. You ran over to the door, thought maybe it was falling down or something. Just the noise finally stopped, and so you went back to sleep. So anyway, the next day, you're driving down towards Grand Teton, and all of a sudden, Karen had this look on her face. She looked over at John. You were snoring. Someone was trying to wake you up. Anyway, let me just say finally, and I know that the time is getting late. I did want to pass on one comment from your group at Pittsburgh, bringing things up to date. And they wanted to be sure that this passion, one passion we've referred to already of eating, that they really appreciate, but that it has become somewhat predictable in the sense that you will often say, "Will someone want to go out to dinner?" I mean, they already know the answer to that. Yeah, yes, okay. And then you will propose, "Well, does anyone want to go anywhere?" And they don't even say anything because they just know. How about Chinese? It's going to be the next one. And so, just thought you'd like to know that they've caught on to you. And then when you finish with the Chinese meal, then John will usually, then the fortune cookies come around. And of course, he won't let on that he's ever said this before, but I'll just key you in so the next time you go to a Chinese restaurant with John, and you could catch him, first before he has a chance to. Why don't you add between the sheets after you read this? And I think I've always done that. It does help. It does help a lot with a lot of the fortunes in these fortune cookies. But they've caught on to you, John. So anyway, but they love you very much too. Anyway, I think I would just follow in Ted's and Wayne's comments that we've all appreciated very much our interactions with you and look forward to those in the future. And I think you deserve this award very, very much.
Thank you very much, Gail.
Thank you, Galen. That concludes the luncheon. See you all again next time.